Hello, welcome to Introspection with Jeff. Uh, Here comes the finally part two of my history of storytelling, my storytelling craft. In part one, I talked about my childhood having written spec scripts. Originally writing stories using Transformers toys characters and stories based off of a Star Trek-like TV series that we developed. We meaning myself and a few of my friends in the neighborhood. So we weren't running gangs. We were playing together and developing series. Um, and I continued on to write spec scripts for television series that I enjoyed. Some of them, with my mom's help, I sent into the production studios, and nothing came of them other than the joy of setting them in and maybe some letter being sent back. Um, and then in college, first few years of college, I wrote a few screenplays, again, not having been produced. And then during that time, I had been intrigued and kind of fell in love with or had a crush on Madonna. And so I wanted to impress her, frankly. So I wrote a screenplay, feature-length screenplay for one of my screenwriting classes. It would have been 1998, and I don't remember the month, but it would have been in 1998, and then I was due soon to graduate in August '99. Then I went on. I submitted that to CAA, Creative Artists Agency, and went off and got a job at CNN. And then while I was at CNN, which didn't last long, it lasted about a month, I got a letter back. Sorry, by the way, I shaved, and I guess I went very close. It's not cut. I mean, it's not blood. It's whatever. It's just I shaved too closely, and I have sensitive skin. Sorry. I might as well get that elephant out. Mention that elephant in the room. Get it out of the way. So um, I sent it to CAA, and then they sent a letter back saying essentially it's not something that we're interested in. I still have the letter packed away. All right, so that was where part one ended. Now, part two, that was in, I'd say, basically beginning of 2000. So I spent the next approximately 11 years, that's a long time, 11 years trying to find work, focused on work, and also jotting notes. Now, I'm doing this video for several reasons. One being that I'd like to explore and learn for myself what my uh, writer's block was, what the source of it was. Was I really experiencing writer's block? And I'd also like to offer an idea that you if you like to share, add in the commentary section. If you've ever experienced writer's block, if so, what have you done to overcome it? What was it like, and so forth. So I had loads and loads of notes of themes and props and bits of dialogue and characters and so forth, built up in folders to improve and expand upon this screenplay I'd written. I had already written it, but I took that CAA letter as I don't know how hard I took it at the time. As I've recalled and as I've told the story to other people, I've said that it caused me to want to develop something better and improve, um, I'd have to remember and think back to how I really actually reacted emotionally to the letter. Um, all right, I did go back to they did. I didn't have a DVD player. I soon got a DVD player, and that helped me. I had a VCR. I had several VCRs, um, and I would just watch movie after movie, and I would watch TV show after TV show and movies, and I would pick up. It's almost funny in almost a sad way, um, how much I picked on nuances and elements of storytelling to the point that I wonder if I picked up too, um, if I noticed too much. Maybe I was drawing at straws. I remember I'd been in Toastmasters. I don't know. I don't remember whether I had been in Toastmasters yet. Um, I think I was. Um, and I remember being in a contest where I went up and it was a humor contest, and I was delivering in a humorous speech to the audience, and I was talking about this very topic. I was talking about struggling and wishing that I had a mentor who could guide me in constructing this screenplay, because I knew it had strong themes to it. It was important. It meant something very much to me, and I knew that its themes spoke to an audience. I knew there was potential there. And I also wanted it to be very good to impress Madonna. So I went through book after book I could find at the library, and I was very careful about not buying too many books. I can imagine writers having bought oodles of books and finding out that they don't tell you very much. All right, here's the downside of doing what I was doing. Um, I went through a lot of books, and they give experience. And these are books written by people who have industry experience, but that doesn't necessarily translate to um, books about how you yourself could create a good screenplay. Um, it told you it told you the very basics. It felt, when I was reading them, it felt like I was reading kindergarten level. Um, what I wanted to do was be at like Steven Spielberg level or George Lucas level, um, or Richard Matheson, or so forth. Um, it said you had to have a protagonist. It talked about the three act structure, and then it would tend to go into their personal lives. They would talk about their personal experience meeting with um, industry executives and so forth. And while that was good and educational for future existence, a future point in my career, right now I just wanted to produce this screenplay, and I wanted to be a good storyteller. Um, so I went through book after book, feeling sad, feeling dismayed. I wasn't depressed. I was dismayed because I could see that I wasn't getting anywhere with these books, um, except for one book. Um, it was called Story, and it's by Robert. Oh, again, I'm blanking on a name. You should be able to look it up. It's simply called Story, and he's given lectures and sermons. Sermons. Basically, somebody could call them sermons. He's given lectures and presentations um, about screenwriting. One thing that appealed to me, especially about his book Story, nice purple cover, was that he was trying to explain it in terms of specific vocabulary and specific language, and he was trying to explain it in a way that would help the screenwriter develop a story. He talked about conflicts or plot points splitting off into multiple strands or threads, stuff like that. And he talked about developing themes in certain ways. That part I liked. That part I appreciated, and I wish there was more of that in the book. It was a book about maybe this thick, and I went back to it like a Bible. But unfortunately, about that much I was drawing from, and the book was about that thick. Now there was another book. I still have that book. The other book I left behind because basically I've memorized what he had to say in that book, and I've since used Kindle and gotten myself a digital copy. And he's written other books since then. I think one called Character and probably one called Theme. I don't know. There was another book. Ironically, when I was still in college, I know I told you this probably in my part one video of this two-parter. There was a book put out, and I believe it has the monogram of American Film Institute on it, but it was written by a woman, particularly, I can't think of the name. If I can find it, I'll put it in the description for this video episode. But she did it very well. She had each chapter dwelling on a separate element of a screenplay. It was genre, theme, characters, and then at the end, there was one about aspects of visuals and aspects of sound and how they play a part in creating a movie, designing a movie, whether you're a filmmaker or even if you're a director. She at first talked about, I think she called it a controlling idea. It's a combination of the intellectual premise and the visceral, emotional feeling that you get. And the point is, as she said, to keep both of them in mind. And she kept both of them in mind while she was working on a screenplay about Libby, the axe murderer, or alleged, convicted axe murderer. Libby. There's a poem. Libby gave her father. You know who I'm talking about. A couple centuries ago, something like that. Libby. Can't remember her last name. Famous person. Anyway, she was writing a play about this person, and she found that was a good technique. The controlling idea, the visceral emotion. If I remember correctly, she felt constrained, and that's how she identified with Libby. That wasn't the intellectual part. The intellectual part was Libby being having to be a Southern belle, or I believe she had to be. The author herself felt constrained because she had to play the role of a Southern belle in her regular life, and so she could identify with this person. The premise is, of course, her chopping her family up. But the visceral, emotional aspect is the feeling of being constrained. So you would think up events and moments that would evoke this feeling of being constrained. I thought that was a good idea. Now, after that, overall, her point, her unique gimmick of the book is that you should write it as you would construct a roller coaster. You have moments of rising action and falling action. You'd have plot points, which are the struts that hold up these moments of rising action, so forth. That was good. That was probably the best book I've read and about screenwriting, the most helpful book I've read about screenwriting. And that was at the beginning. That was while I was still in college. That was the first book I got um, when I had an attitude and a goal of um, professionally writing a screenplay. And then I went and I read these other books, but I didn't know that all I had, the best one I had was that original book until later on when I realized, gee, that first book was all I really needed. Um, all I needed at the time. Okay, so while I was struggling to find some way of getting to a mentor with more experience who could guide me through, just like any other profession, like in the Karate Kid, um, Daniel meets Mr. Miyagi, who becomes a sensei and learns karate from the sensei. Why couldn't you have that for screenwriting? Um, I was in central New York and I had little, if any, connection to Hollywood or the industry itself. Um, it made me very sad and dismayed. Um, Meanwhile, I was volunteering at a political group for a senator and a state congressperson, and so forth, and then between that, I was looking for work and volunteering. It was actually costing me money to take a bus downtown to volunteer at this elected person's office. So I quit that. Then in 2004, 2005, I got a job. It was part-time, um, and I worked there for the next 11 years. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this before, and um, I'm likely to mention working there in future videos. Um, and even though I had that part-time job, it was still a part-time job, and I still felt bothered. I wanted to make it big with the screenplay and with future screenplays and develop a career. So I was also listening to podcasts. Um, at one point, I heard a podcast. I believe it was On the Page, and she deserves this. I should mention the podcast. I can't remember her name. It's funny when it's not at the forefront of your mind, you forget things. Like in my prior video, I could remember the song "Hungry Like the Wolf," but I couldn't remember Duran Duran's name. um, anyway, the podcast is called On the Page. Um, and I don't know whether I want the person to see this video because I hope she's not too saddened that I can't remember her name to plug her own name. All right, so she interviews people who are in the industry, and it was mentioned at one point a few times there would be, I guess, conventions. There would be, I want to say, writing workshops. There would be conventions of people with industry professionals giving speeches, and then, of course, as usual, uh, aspiring writers would line up afterwards, and they will give their pitch. It would be like a 1 or 2 minute pitch, and sometimes these are organized, where there'd be a separate section where it's organized. The professionals will be at their tables or booths or whatever, and they're waiting for people to come up and pitch them, as opposed to other times when they're just there to give a speech or presentation to a crowd, and then afterwards they keep getting bugged by writers. So it costs some money to. So that's a thing. So I was considering this, and I talked with my mom. Gee, this may be my one opportunity, the one technique I have to be able to get this thing into development somehow, pitch it to somebody at one of these things. And of course, there are ticket costs and a whole bunch of other costs, and it can get expensive. And in however many words, my mom said, "Well, it is pretty expensive. Are you sure?" Something like, "Are you sure you want to do this? Is there some other way?" Maybe she's. I remember talking with her. I don't remember whether she said that or not, but I can imagine that being something she would say. She tended to be protective, and she tended to um, provide the voice of doubt. Um, and if I get to this in a future video, here's a precursor. Um, I think sometimes that has set me back in some opportunities, in some ways. I'd like to explore that. Anyway, so at 2000, around 2011, maybe 2010, I was looking online and I already had a LinkedIn profile. Now, LinkedIn is something like Facebook. It's part of the collective social media. However, this is specifically career oriented. This is where you post your resume and you make your professional presence known. It's basically like Facebook or MySpace, only for careers and professions and resumes and networking. Um, so I knew I wanted to write with someone. I needed somebody with more experience where I could with whom I could share my ideas and have them be constructed into a screenplay better than my skill would let me and experience would let me at the time. So I connected with this person and we developed a friendship, like a friendly working relationship. And I would I began to send her checks as she would ghostwrite. Um, Now, the reason I chose her was because she, well, right off the bat, she had a pitch. She had like an advertisement saying that she's produced these films, and she listed several films um, with with her studio. I believe it was her studio, or it was a studio that she was connected with. So already there was some promise. I don't want to say promise. There was some inkling that whatever script was written would be produced. Um, so um, so I told her about this idea. A guy falls in love with Madonna. It's a screwball comedy, 1930s and 40s, and the idea appealed to her, and she said she really liked the idea. She's happy to work on it. And so I would send her checks as she would work on the script, and I would send her um, my notes and all these different things I had over. Remember, this is like a decade and then some, like a decade and something worth of ideas and notes and themes and so forth. Um, and it took a lot of effort to get her to understand certain themes, or particularly Kabbalah. There were Kabbalistic themes, Kabbalistic allusions, um, and it took her a bit of effort to understand those themes, and just in general, many of the themes, just it was like explaining. Okay, here's what I hear. A lot of emails back and forth. We weren't talking on the phone. I don't know if we ever spoke. I think we spoke at least once over the phone, but at the beginning. But outside of that, it was me sending her notes by email, um, and then explaining. Okay, here's what, and then her emailing back. Um, these are okay. This is the script. These are the scenes I've scripted so far, and then I'm going to have this, and then me reading it and saying, no, that's not what I meant. Here, this is what I meant. No, you have this wrong. No, I meant it this way. and then explaining it. And it's again, it's, as I said in my earlier video on a different topic, it's lost in translation. So finally, all right, New Year's Eve, I'm guessing uh, heading into 2012, she finishes the screenplay. And I should mention the project because, I should mention the plot because the objective story changed. And I should also mention the predicaments I was um, enduring. The original screenplay, um, the edition that I submitted for final credit in the college course was a parody with other elements put in, but it was a parody of Taming of the Shrew. And then for this project, afterwards, it was the same themes. It was the same romantic interest and the same romantic conflicts, but the overall story was not Taming of the Shrew. It was what if it was a group of people who were screwing around with Madonna being the actual person, somebody I imagined would play Madonna. You know, the Madonna as a character. Um, the Madonna as a character. Okay, you get the idea. It's not that she would play herself in the movie. Anyway, or she would play another character in the movie. People screwing around with her life and details about herself so that they could profit off of it. And then she has to prove that she didn't really. Is brought into court, and she has to prove that these things aren't real. It's a comedy. So, so the script was finally finished, and after a few paychecks sent out by me, given keep in mind that I was working part time, so this was some cost, to me. But I believed in this, and I saw it as an investment. Okay, so probably New Year's Eve. I remember snow, and going into 2012, I remember walking with my mom, having gotten that script emailed to me and reading it. Um, I remembered walking around the fair. There's a fair along the lake. They have every New Year's Eve. They have a small. It's really. This is central New York, so it's not Times Square levels. It's more like a village with little lights, set up along the lake, and so it's that kind of deal, that scale. Um, I remember reading it and replying back to her by email. This isn't up to the quality. Something like this isn't really what I up to what I envisioned. And then she emailed. I may have said that. In any to any extent, I remember her emailing that if I wanted to do a revision, that would be a new contract, and therefore I'd be paying more money to produce a new script. So, so I was walking around with this in mind, and perhaps at that point I already decided I don't want to invest more money in something that wasn't going to work. Didn't seem to be work. That didn't work in the first draft. I don't want to pour money or dump money down into something into a script that might produce a script that might be as equally bad. So, and notice I didn't mention any names, thankfully. So in 2012, so it's still on my mind though. It's like my raison d'etre, my reason for being, reason of being. Um, Sometime in the spring or summer, early summer, um, I had borrowed a movie called Inception, and that movie, not the plot, but the themes in the movie evoked and mimicked some of the same themes I had in this story I had in my mind that I wanted to flesh out into a feature script. Um, and so I was looking online for commentaries and what other people had to say. Just naturally, I really I really this film really spoke to me thematically. I want to see else, what other themes, what other talk about those themes exists online. And then I came across this website blog by somebody named Jim Hull. And he's talking about something called Dramatica. And he talks about how Dramatica is a theory of a new, unique theory of storytelling. And he explains in this blog post um, an aspect of the theory and how it's borne out, how it manifests in the particular movie he was talking about. He's using that movie as an example, that thing in that movie as an example of this trait of movies in Dramatica. And I started exploring it. I read his blog. It was almost like it was basically it was basically a point when I was equating Jim Hall with Dramatica, and then I quickly got up to speed on the history of Dramatica, what it was, in Jim Hall's place in it, and where his blog fits in, and how he came to develop his blog. Um, okay, this is a good point to explain briefly. I mentioned it a little bit before what Dramatica is. Dramatica was developed by two college students, at least one of whom had a background in psychology. They're both film students. They're both men, and they worked on this monster movie, which is, you could see. I don't know if you can see it, and to what extent you could see of it on YouTube. I know on some streaming service like Amazon Prime or something, I know I was able to watch the whole thing and saw the credits, and they've talked a little bit about it. It's been mentioned. It's an average. It's what you would expect. It's pretty good for something made by two somewhat adult college students, making a feature with quality film, and it's set up right, and there's dialogue. I mean, the actors are pretty good actors. The special effects are okay, somewhat. It's what you would expect from something like that. This would have been like 1980. I'm thinking early 1980s, or something like early 1980, maybe late 70s. So they decided, okay, that first film was, before we make our second film, let's take about 10 years. Let's meet up again sometime in the future after we've gained some experience. So that's what they did, and it was something like 1991, somewhere around there, where they met up again. And by that point, one of them had a sex reassignment surgery. Now she's a woman, and she had these hormones and so forth, chemical changes, hormonal changes, and so forth. And she noticed certain things when she was undergoing those hormonal changes. Her instincts started to change. She started, if I remember correctly, forgive me if I'm getting this a little off, but she describes reaching for a toothpaste, and she didn't reach for the shape of a toothpaste bottle. She noticed she was reaching for the colors of the toothpaste tube, and her views, her instincts, she noticed were changing a bit. And so she developed this idea that perhaps there's a linear way of thinking and a female way of thinking, and then that people didn't really take to that very well. So in later versions of Dramatica, um, linear, I mean, male and female changed. Originally, it was basically the question: if you got the software and you're trying to work with the software, as I understand it, originally it was basically asking as one of the think binary choices you make in designing your screenplay. Um, does your main character think like a man or think like a woman? What they were getting at was, does your main character think in terms of this leads to this and causes and effects, or does your main character think in terms of dealing with relationships? I mean, dealing with conflicts and situations in terms of reorienting relationships and flow, and rather than cause and effect. Um, and those two differences are stereotypically male and female. Um, um, okay, I'll get into um, my surprise and joyful astonishment at discovering Dramatica in a moment. But let me finish the rest of the history of Dramatica. Um, so they worked together, um, and since the one who had the sex reassignment surgery is more of a writer, she I know more about it from her point of view because she has her own blog. She has her own YouTube channel. I think, in fact, she may. I know she has more than one YouTube channel. She's been more productive and more expressive. Um, so I see. So I'm more familiar with it from her point of view. She would work long hours, and at one point she described it as if she put the rest of her mind on hold in order to figure out this theory. Um, they 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 wanted, again, remember, they wanted to understand better how film works and film structure. That's right up my alley. That's exactly why I knew I needed more help. Um, that was my target. I didn't want to simply just write dialogue or write scenes. I knew from that CAA letter, that Creative Artists Agency, what I call rejection letter, that um, other people, um, other people. I'm sorry. I was concerned that maybe I hope my voice was able to get through to the microphone here. Um, I knew that I needed to understand film structure so that I wasn't wasting screen time. I knew enough, and I don't want to say talented. I had enough insight to understand that I didn't want to waste time on screen. So, um, she was working on this, and they went through different models and ways that they could orient these blocks and so forth. And so then uh, she did a lot of work. Eventually, came up with this four-level structure, this four-level like periodic table of elements. Um, the top level applying mostly to genre, the second level to plot, and the third level to theme, and the fourth level to character. Um, and he would also ask insightful questions. He would my impression is that typically she would present this to him, and he would take a moment, and then he would say, "Yes, I understand that. Yes, that makes sense." Um, I can think of at least one example when he asked, asked a question that really helped develop this model. He asked,
Well, if the primary character, if the protagonist, or whoever, if the primary character knows what his problem is, why doesn't he just go and solve it? And so um, that led to the idea that you're distracted, you have this symptom, you may not understand what your true problem is. You may think this other thing is your problem. Um, astonishingly fast pace. Um, a couple years, something like that. By this is like 91. By 93, they already had the software set up, and they had the theory pretty much all figured out. And they made a presentation. Then so they Jim Hall was the next person they consulted, and he liked the idea. No, not I'm sorry, not Jim Hall. No, I'm sorry. Oh nuts. There's a third person who's worked with them, and since then he's moderated the writing workshop that's connected with Dramatica. And I'm blank. Sorry, I'm very sorry. I'm blanking on your name right now. He liked the idea. He was enthusiastic about the idea, and then somewhere along the line, Jim Hall um, uh, got into this group, and he enjoyed it. And there, about that point, there were enthusiasts of this theory who would gather together, and they still gather together every month. They would watch a film in the office building. I mean, also there's a certain room in the office building. They all gather together. They would watch the film, and then afterwards, one of them would go through the questions of the theory. There's a standard set of questions. These are the same questions that you yourself would figure out. These are binary questions. Is it this way or this way? Do you want this character to change or remain the same? Da da da, stuff like that. Does the character think linearly or holistically? Stuff like that. You would identify those traits, and uh, he would mark them off on the board. Um, those same questions that would be in the software that you would answer if you have the software at home and you're doing it yourself. And then over as you're doing it during those minutes, the software is already calculating. Well, there it's already answering those other questions or those other aspects of the Rubik's Cube combination pattern that are allowed. In other words, as you're identifying, as you're answering questions and making choices, it's narrowing down the possible permutations um, of the rest of the report. So your goal is by the end to get to one report, one only one permutation of all these different factors, and there are something like 70 something, maybe if you really stretch it, maybe 80 factors. Um, this is wonderful. This is exactly what I needed, and it's also a bit of a dismay that they came up with this, and it was released in 1994, and I was just graduating high school in '94, and here I spent those college years unaware of it, totally unaware of it, and here I was finding out about it in 2012, and so I would have anyway, but there's an extra urgency in catching myself, getting myself up to speed with knowing everything about Dramatica. And there's something about Dramatica itself. It's like a rabbit hole. I'm sure somebody else has referred to it as well as a rabbit hole. Um, there was also a tension. There was an unfortunate tension because on the one hand, and there was a screen, I think it was called screenplay.com or something. There was a forum where posts. People could post questions, and there's an online discussion, not necessarily exclusively moderated by the developers of Dramatica. Um, they would one of them would occasionally come in and comment and answer something, but usually it was writers discussing Dramatica amongst themselves in this online forum. Um, and I would ask like specific questions about how Dramatica works. I figured that it's like driving a car. You could get in, and if you don't know what you're doing, if you kind of wing it and you kind of guess, you've never driven a car before, but you have to turn the steering wheel and you have to keep on the road, um, you might get into an accident. You might flip the car over. You might go too fast. It's not just, oh, just wing it. You have to know what you're doing. One of the co-founders compared it to baking a cake. If you don't have the recipe and you just take, as most people do, they watch a movie and they think, oh, I can write a movie. It's a whole different experience trying to write a movie, even if you've seen a lot of movies, which I have, and I even started off writing some stories. Even then, it was difficult. He compared it to baking something. You can enjoy a cake, you can taste the cake, and you can guess at some of the ingredients, perhaps. But try and replicate that. Try and back work that. Try and guess what ingredients went into making the cake and how long it should be cooked, and so forth and so on. Try and guess the recipe based on your experience eating the slice of cake. And I knew even at that time I was smart enough. At least give me credit. I felt like screaming to the world, at least give me credit for understanding that structure really is important, and that these elements of theory really are important. So I would post questions about, like, what does this really mean? There's an online free manual. By the way, if you go to dramatica.com, a lot of stuff is available for free. On YouTube, Jim Hall still has his YouTube channel. You'd recognize it if the video is about 2 hours long, sometimes longer than the movie that they're analyzing. That's Jim Hall's YouTube. There are several Jim Halls apparently on YouTube, and not all of them is this particular person. And even reading his blog site, it was like pulling teeth. It was like sometimes the answers were so vague. There was something behind. There had to be something behind the theory, because it was reliably predicting what the movie looked like. Let me get back to that. Let me get back to those monthly meets where these people would watch. These people enthusiasts from off the street, basically, would watch the movie in a room, and then afterward he would go through and until they got down to one story, what they called a story form. It was only one permutation, had like 80 different aspects picked out. It's a static report. This is what theme would be explored in the overall story in Act 1, and then Act 2, Act 3. This is what the main character's personal problem would be. This is what the solution would be. This is what the conflict in the objective story would be, the conflict in the main character, conflict in the impact character, and so forth. It's like identifying all these different aspects. It's not just vague statements. And then let me see. They watch the movie and then they analyze it. Right? They answer. There are 4 main character binary questions, and there are 4 objective story questions, and then you narrow it down further in terms of what the predicament, the conflict is in one or several of the other 4 perspectives: the objective story, the relationship story, the main character, or in the impact character. And then it narrows it down to one permutation. So then they go through and look through the report and see how closely it matches. And um, many, most times it'll be a very close match. It'll be like astonishing how closely the report predicted what would happen in the movie. I thought, wow, that's exactly what I needed. It's a great tool. I thought at the beginning of this, I would just I would simply uh, use like a free sample. I don't remember how I got it. I somehow I started taking notes before buying the software. I started taking notes, and maybe there was some free version of it that I tried out. I think that was it. I think it was a free version I tried out, and I figured I would just figure this stuff out, and then I don't have to buy the actual thing. The actual thing it wasn't that expensive. I mean, considering how powerful it is and revolutionary, it's something like $200. I mean, it was 100. It was on that level. It's very cheap, very inexpensive. It wasn't cheap implies it's not of high quality. It was inexpensive for something you're actually getting. So I found, gee, this is very involving. I'll just buy the darn thing and work with it. So anyway, so back to the fora, plural for forum, in case you didn't know. The fora and Jim Hall's blog site. I was picking up information bit by bit, and that's why I kept those notes. I still have it, a stapled packet of pieces of paper of notes about how Dramatica works. So it's like pulling teeth, trying to get past the vagueness of some of the answers, and just basically vagueness of some of the answers. And I always got the impression that they were actual, well, I kind of want to say mathematical formulae. It's not exactly mathematical formulae. It approaches math. It's like trigonometry. Actually, the one who got the sex change predicts that there will be a quaternometry revolution in mathematics. There's something definitive here. It's not just let's play pretend and let's write a model of what we see in movies. The model actually explains why you see certain things in movies, like why there tends to be a relationship plot line or subplot. Why the character sometimes doesn't change. The character doesn't have to change. Main character doesn't have to change. Stuff like that. I wanted to know that more and more, so that going back to my car analogy, I wanted to be able to get in the car fully aware, like an airplane or whatever, fully aware of all the tools and being able to use it expertly. Like somebody sits in the saddle of a horse and really commands the horse. Like a pilot sits in the cockpit and takes full control over the plane, and somebody gets into a car and takes full control over the car. Feels comfortable. So that way I can feel comfortable when I'm writing my screenplays. Not just this screenplay, but in general, in my career. I can feel comfortable writing other screenplays, and being an expert. Because I want to watch like Fantasy Island while I'm sketching out my scenes or something, I don't want to take like 20 years on one screenplay. You may not know that in the industry you have to be very quick in terms of writing, of screenwriting. If you get an assignment, there's a point where you can pitch ideas, but once you become essentially an established screenwriter, then they give assignments to you, and you can take the offer or not. But once you get the offer, they give you limited time to be able to produce something, and like Dan Aykroyd's character in Ghostbusters, they expect results. So I wanted this something like this Dramatica software to help me quicken my pace at producing material, spitting it out professionally on a quick basis. Now, okay, overnight you want this you want 40% of the screenplay rewritten in 2 days. Okay, I'll do that on that level. So, um, all right, so that was 2012 going on, and that took a lot of years. And over time, of course, with questions to Jim Hall, and I'd like to express appreciation and thanks, personal thanks to Jim Hall and to everybody involved in Dramatica for being patient with me and for trying to, answer my questions to the best of their ability. The people involved with Dramatica really do care, and they really look out for, even in the writing sessions, the writing workshop sessions. Um, they really do care, and they want to help each other's fellow writers. Um, all right, so all right, that takes me to more recent times, like 2017, something 2018, something like that. Um, Jim Hall. Oh, I should also mention something about Jim Hall's blog site, that I learned quite a bit just from that blog site. When I was stretching and I was trying to understand Dramatica, his blog posts were more definitive and more detail oriented than many times what I got in the other fora. Um, he explained things nitty gritty, and that's what I really appreciated. I felt like we were in the same mindset. First of all, he preferred the original terminology, as opposed to the change terminology to match what people used when they used the software. Originally, the creators used a certain set of terminology because that fit what the model, how the model actually worked. For example, in the top level, oh no, yeah, no, not the top level. In addition to the periodic table, the Rubik's cube kind of thing, there are four. Um, yeah, there's a quad of four possible um, situations or possible kinds of conflict. Um, any one of the four perspectives, the objective story, the main character, impact character, or subjective story, relationship story, can become entrapped in. Um, there's a static being stuck physically in something, and then there's being stuck psychologically, and then there's a physics. Um, the conflict lies in the physics of things in motion, and then there's the conflict of psychological elements in motion. So, the original terminology was universe, mind, physics, and psychology. And later on, psychology became retermed manipulation. And I don't like that. I like the original concept, psychology. Um, Manipulation comes up quite often in psychology, so I say, why not simply stick to the original term, psychology? And it fits with the overall scheme. Universe then became changed to situation. Well, you could be stuck in a mental situation. Situation is vague. The original concept was universe. You're stuck in the universe, some aspect of the universe, um, is stuck, and the way to solve it is to become unstuck. The way to solve a this mind is to become unstuck mentally, and of course, the way to get out of physics kind of situation. So yeah, you can apply situation to any four of them. Get out of a physics situation is not just to simply get unstuck, but it's a process or a motion of different things um, to resolve that. Same way with psychology, you can't simply just get unstuck mentally. It's a process to go through in order to resolve the conflict or the situation. Um, so, anyway, all right, Jim Hall. Okay, that's Jim Hall. These things in better detail um, and more explicitly. It's almost like going to the original blueprints as opposed to relying on rumors of what somebody says that he heard about from somebody else who who sort of understood it after seeing the blueprint for a few moments. Um, all right. Jim Hall wanted kind of to branch off and create his own thing, um, applying Dramatica specifically to screenwriters and screenwriting and creative artists so that they could apply, they could utilize Dramatica. If you're going straight to exclusively Dramatica, what he wanted to do was create an offshoot called Subtext, which would be techniques applying Dramatica to the process of screenwriting or story creating. So he brought up aspects that he had known from having talked personally with the two developers of the theory, such as conflict. This is something that had become watered down and vague and just not really mentioned during the analysis sessions. But he mentioned that yes, one of the two co-founders said yes, at every just about should really be expressed as a conflict. It's not just a conflict of arguments like you're nasty, no, you're nasty, no, you're nasty. It's a conflict involving two values, and you're struggling to deal with those two values. Actually, he brought in someone else who's had industry experience, and this other person moderated, I shouldn't say moderated, guided an episode series as an exercise in, he guided a video series exercise developing a screenplay from scratch, so that people could watch and understand, catch the techniques. And he expressed it as a conflict of two truths. This is a truth you hold. This is a whole truth you hold to be true. This is also a truth you hold to be true, but they can't coexist. At least they can't coexist peacefully. A good example is that if you believe all life is sacred, however, if you're caught near an angry or rambunctious bear who's about to eat you alive, you value your own life as sacred. So in general, what's common is life. However, it splits off into a conflict between two values or two statements. All life is sacred and should be protected, and also your own life is valuable and should be protected. You've got to defend. Either you've got to defend yourself and kill off the bear, or you believe that your own life is not as valuable as all life in general. It's a very difficult conflict, and that's what makes stories more worthwhile when they have better, and I would say more mature conflicts. So that helped me too, because all right, this is another part of my writer's block or stumbling block or whatever. Um, when I was applying this report, and I went through several different permutations or several different reports trying to approximate what was in my mind, what I envisioned, and sometimes even what I envisioned changed slightly. Um, uh, for the most part, the more I understood Dramatica and how Dramatica worked, um, I went back to altering the reports to some degree, getting it to be closer to what I envisioned. Sometimes it spat out something that one of the other values in the report, one of the other conclusions, let's say, um, didn't match, didn't the prediction didn't match what I envisioned instinctively. And to some degree, what Dramatica is doing is really predicting your own instincts. Um, so, so that was tricky. Now let me get to that thing I mentioned before, the four different possible conflicts that a perspective can be found in universe, psychology, and mind. Um, each one of those perspectives, the main character, the objective story, the impact character, and the impact character, main character, impact character, objective story, and subjective story or relationship story, um, same thing, would be assigned to those different parts. In other words, you could have an objective story in physics, as American movies do. You could have a main character in universe, which many American films tend to have. I should also say sometimes I originally I um, in my college script version I did I didn't have a primary character really over the other character. Or Jake. I think it was Jake in that story. I'm pretty sure it was Jake in that story. I had them as two primary characters because I was modeling it somewhat after the 1938 movie with Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, Bringing Up Baby. I saw them as two primary characters, although I did know that more of the focus of the story. So in that way, I believe I wrote it, yeah, with more of a focus on Jake. But then I thought, well, Madonna herself has a degree of conflict. She's going through stuff too. And so sometimes I would, in my rewriting a note, that long, like 10-year note period, I would flip back and forth between Madonna and Jake, or at that point renamed Joe after Joseph, as an allegory to the biblical story of Joseph interpreting Pharaoh's dreams and having some insight into something greater than himself. Um, and so Dramatica answered that question. One character has to be primary because that's the audience's eye perspective into the story. And it's not just a relationship with another primary character, it's that this other character um, represents an alternative way of handling situations. And there's a thematic writer's argument being or should be presented there. That's why our minds are constructed to create stories that way. It's not just to have scenes between the main character and this other love interest or whatever. It's so that that love interest can provide an alternative way of handling things, an alternative attitude. And you, as the main character, or you seeing the movie through the main character's eyes, either um, see that character's take on things as the better way of handling your own personal problem, or sticking with how you've been dealing with your own personal problems, so forth. That's a taste of how advanced Dramatica is. The model actually explains why um, movies are the way they are, constructed the way they are. And not just movies, but television shows, and even music to some degree, um, and books and so forth. The narrative structure. Um, so it's all right. So subtext has helped. Um, I was also dealing with so genre and objective story. As I mentioned before, I always had in mind uh, Madonna and Jake, who became Joe. I always had in mind them having a relationship, just like in Bringing Up Baby and just like in romantic comedy. And I always envisioned it as a fast-paced romantic comedy with lots of action and adventure. Um, I didn't know what genre to put it in. Um, at the beginning, I was mimicking elements from Bringing Up Baby, and then um, in Taming of the Shrew, I was mimicking Taming of the Shrew. You may remember, you may have seen in an earlier video, I worked best at that point um, with a universe that had already been established. Like I was writing spec scripts of TV episodes for TV series already established. There's already a universe. There's a kind of conflict that's already been established. In Star Trek, it would be being in a starship, encountering some weird phenomenon. You could write to that. Or in Night Court, it's a sitcom, a workplace sitcom, and I know the characters already. They've already been established, and you know the general process. There's some kind of court case. Somebody comes in with a case that's tricky, that's difficult, and causes conflict. And so Taming of the Shrew, the first version was a parody of Taming of the Shrew. Then I went to trying to write it as like a court case parody or court. I don't want to say courtroom because it implies it all takes place within a courtroom. Kind of like a cop, kind of like a crime tabloid kind of movie satire. And perhaps you can tell in the way I'm describing it. I wasn't sure exactly what genre to really write it in, and I wasn't quite well. No, that's not true. I did have an inkling about genre. I could recognize genre, and I kept wanting it to be something like adventure, action, adventure, story. But yet, I was trying to put in this crime courtroom type aspect or plot to it. Um, so so finally, after a lot of years of studying Dramatica, and especially when Jim Hull's subtext came in and he was talking about genre, I understood it much better. I was trying to infuse several different genres into the same story. What I believe was going on was that I had the main character. Remember, I mentioned four: main character, impact character, objective story, subjective or relationship story. It's the same thing. The main character, sometimes early on, was Madonna, but for the most part, I had Joe as Madonna, especially for that courtroom type scenario. I had Madonna being the main character, but I reasoned later on, as it shifted, that the audience could better relate to a non-celebrity looking at a celebrity. Remember, in Dramatica, the way the theory goes, you're looking at it. You're looking at the story through the main character's perspective, through the eyes of the main character. You're experiencing these conflicts emotionally and personally, and you're looking at this objectified other person. Well, you're looking at these other all these different characters objectively. You're not. You may understand and you may follow along with the conflicts that these other characters are experiencing, but you're not emotionally connected with to the same degree that you are or you should be with the main character. The same way, the impact character is this other character that you're not really emotionally tied with. You're not emotionally experiencing the movie from the point of view of this impact character. You are through the main character. For example, in Star Wars, you're emotionally experiencing it through Luke Skywalker's point of view. You may see and sympathize with Princess Leia's conflicts, so forth, and even Obi-Wan's conflicts. The emotional aspect, you can you can get some glimpse in, you can follow, you can understand, especially the way Sir Alec Guinness portrayed Obi-Wan Kenobi. You can understand the emotions running through his mind and so forth, his motivations, but not to the same degree as with Luke Skywalker. That's what makes him the main character. So I figured that, later on at some point it solidified in my mind. No, Joe must be the main character. Madonna would be the impact character, because for one reason being that the audience could better relate to Joe looking at this celebrity. Now that gets to something else about Dramatica. I said objectified before, that the impact character would be objectified. You look at, like Joe would be looking at Madonna, as opposed to Madonna looking at Jake. The Dramatica report gives you a conflict. Either you select what the theme of the conflict is yourself, or it selects it for you based on how it narrows down the possible permutations. You see the impact character from an outside point of view. So Joe would be as okay. So right. So there was a decision. Do I make? I already had the objective story picked for physics. Now that due to certain reasons, the way the theory works, that limits the main character Joe to either being a beer or a doer. No, I'm sorry. No, either being stuck. I'm sorry. His own personal conflict would either be because he's stuck physically in something, or because he's stuck in a mindset. And I found that it makes more sense that he would be in a mindset, stuck in a mindset. And if he were unstuck, then that would resolve his personal problem. He would be, at ease. It would resolve his problem. And in my mind, the way I envisioned it, I always saw Joe relating to Madonna as a celebrity, and he's a fan. And one of his problems, or an aspect of his overall problem, is that or certainly in their relationship, in that conflict, he's concerned about how she would regard him. So that's why it didn't seem that she should be in her personal conflict, the conflict of her personal through line as an impact character shouldn't be in mind. Her mind isn't stuck; it has to be unstuck. It's more like his mind is stuck in a certain set of belief systems, and he's looking at her. This is where I get to the aspect of being objectified. He's the main character looking at her as an objectified impact character. She is this star celebrity, and she's stuck, um, and that's causing conflict for her. The fact that she's stuck, I mean, to some degree, especially the way I tell my story, um, she's stuck as a celebrity. It's not okay. Here, this is a different way of describing it. Um, where they are placed. You have stuck in a physical universe or stuck in a mental mindset. The main character is experiencing conflict through this. The impact character, wherever that is, that kind of conflict, you don't experience that conflict personally, but you're seeing it through the main character's eyes. So it's more like that conflict is what's making an impact on you as a main character. So I saw it clearly more as um, he's stuck in a certain mindset, and her impact on him. Remember, objectification. Her impact on him as an external, like puppet on a hand. Her external impact on him is that she's a celebrity, and that also causes some conflict for her personally, um, and not the other way around. I don't. It seems to fit the story I had in mind better that way. So that was fine. And then, of course, obviously, they have a relationship, and that seemed okay. It's the objective story. It was 1/4 of the whole quad. You have main character, impact character, objective story, and subjective story, or otherwise relationship story. The objective story is that aspect of the story that involves everybody. It's not just the main character and impact character or their relationship together. It's the whole story. So in Star Wars, you have Luke Skywalker as the main character, Obi-Wan Kenobi is the impact character. They have a relationship of trainer, trainee, like he's a mentor and he's a student, and there's that learning about the Force. That's their relationship. It also applies to the objective story, but it's their personal relationship together. It's the heart of the story. The head of the story, as with the head of any story, is that objective story, and it's only 1/4, but that takes up a lot of storytelling. That's the aspect. That's the rebels versus the empire. That involves all the characters. What everybody's concerned about is this group of rebels and their hidden base, and the empire going at any length they can to discover where the hidden base is, and so forth, and spaceships and lightsabers and stormtroopers. That's all objective story, and Darth Vader and so forth. That's all objective story. It's funny that in the grand scheme, that's only 1/4 of the whole unit as you're trying to design your story. And from what I learned after years, it feels like well, literally, I guess you could say it is decades, like 2 decades and something. I realized more and more it's the thing that tripped me up quite a bit was that one little objective story thing. I knew it at the time, sort of. I didn't have the Dramatica speak and the model, the theory to be able to explain it until really 2012, and the more I learned, the more I picked up and could express it. Was that the one of the things that was tripping me up in terms of writer's block was that I had the scenario: what if some guy met Madonna and had this crush on her and so forth? How do you deal with that? And could a relationship work? And in what form could such a relationship be in, and so forth? But what kind of plot do you stick that into? And as I said, the first version, it was a parody of Taming of the Shrew. That was like the objective story, and then that changed to the kind of courtroom tabloid satire. And then that changed to something that I had around the time that I had, after I had been working at the one insurance agency, and we were, that agency was bought out by or acquired by another agency around 2015. And at that point, I remember it was 2015, and I worked there for 7 months until they let me go, um, for whatever reason. I mean, nothing I did. They reassured me it was nothing I did. Um, but at that time, that small amount of time, um, I remember specifically working on this other kind of scenario for quite a while, um, about the music industry. Um, I always knew that it had to fit in somehow into the music industry. The plot had to fit into the music industry, and I kept trying to involve MTV as a plot element somehow. I had in mind that Warner Brother, I mean, these things could be changed. I was writing it in such a way, knowing that they could be changed. Um, if I had to change Madonna to a fictional character, I thought up Farrah because it sounds like Pharaoh, and of course Farrah Fawcett was famous in the late 70s and early 80s. Um, that was actually a suggestion by somebody else, which I'll get to soon. So I had, what if it's Farrah, could be Farrah, or really, I mean, if Madonna, if I couldn't get the rights, if I couldn't get her acceptance to let me use her likeness in the movie, I could change it to Farrah and fictionalize that character. Um, I had this scenario where they're Russian Soviet spies. Remember, it takes place during the Cold War. It takes place around 1985, right during the peak of like her fame. Um, Not that her fame peaked at exclusively that point, but she was very big at that point. And you had a lot of 80s icons right around that time. I didn't want to make it too early in the 1980s, because I couldn't be able to use these other things. MTV was there, but a lot of other things weren't there until later on in the decade. So still during the Cold War, sort of, there was a détente, but there were still tensions, uneasiness with the United States and the Soviet Union. Um, so Russian spies want to reinvigorate and heat up the Cold War. So they go and infiltrate the music studio Warner Brothers specifically because I wanted it to be where Madonna. I wanted it to be the company that Madonna is associated with, so that she becomes personally involved. And the premise is that these are spies humorously trying to fit into American culture, going undercover, uh, trying to mimic and pretend to be Americans. And of course, that's a source of great comedy. There's certainly potential for comedy there, and they get cultural things wrong. They guess wrong. They misunderstanding plays a big part in this premise. They misunderstand American colloquialisms and American themes and so forth. They try to blend in and try to go undercover. Um, then that kind of switched to, or there was an added element to it, where I was reading about musicians, famous celebrities, being sleeper agents without even knowing it. I mean, not that I believe it, but it's potential for comedy, and it seems so far fetched that it could be fanciful enough to fit into a comedy scenario. That they were hypnotized basically. So I thought that would be interesting if at some point Madonna becomes concerned that she's concerned that how did she become famous so fast? was it set up for her? Is she herself a sleeper agent and she doesn't even know it? That's interesting. That's some true depth, and that's the level of depth that I put into these aspects and traits. These notes that I would scribble down and keep in these notebooks. And it's a shame. It's a real shame if this movie in some form isn't produced. Um, anyway, so I matched up using another social media platform. Um, I can't remember exactly, maybe Facebook, another social media platform. I connected with another writer, a screenwriter who had some credits, and I think she lives, well, I don't want to give away. She doesn't live in California, but she had moved to California, and so I think no, we did not specifically. We did not speak on the phone because I was always curious what her voice sounded like, and she said her voice sounded childlike or sort of high pitched, and she seemed kind of embarrassed by that. Kind of delighted me because now I got really curious. I personally, admittedly, I'm attracted to high pitched voices, and more feminine sounding voices. Um, anyway, um, aside from the very feminine voice, apparently she had, um, she was very good to interact with professionally and discuss these ideas, and I was able to share ideas. That's another thing. I also wanted not only a mentor, but I wanted a sounding board, somebody who knew about the industry, who had experience, so that I could share ideas with the other person, just if only for the sake of sharing ideas with the other person. I had spent some time talking with my mom, sharing ideas with my mom, and it wouldn't work so well. She was receptive, but it's sort of like the equivalent of, oh, yeah. She wouldn't even necessarily say, oh, that's a good idea. She would follow and she'd be enthusiastic. But she would be a calm enthusi. She would calmly be enthusiastic. Um, and she would support me and so forth. In fact, when I would tell her about my struggle and um, the worry and concern I had about getting a full-time job, being underemployed and unemployed, she would always say, "Oh, what about your writing? What about that movie you're writing?" So forth. She was very supportive, and even though now she's passed on, talking about this in this video, hopefully we'll let that live on. So I would interact with this person. I remember Facebook Messenger. It's probably on Facebook Messenger. Probably on Facebook that I connected with this person. Um, Facebook Messenger and so forth. As a matter of fact, um, sometime in October 2018, um, my mom was sitting downstairs, and I was with her, and um, she I may have helped her to the bed or something like that. Um, I was hanging around her. She wasn't that active physically, and she just wanted me to be around. She said I didn't necessarily have to be near her, just be around. So I think she was in bed, and then it seemed like things were calm, and then so I went to Facebook messaging or texting with this writer partner and went upstairs, and then, well, to put it quickly and bluntly, basically the next morning, early morning, I came downstairs, and that's when I found my mom had died. Um, so not that I place any responsibility on this writer partner. It's just that I link um, my messaging with this person um, in the last moments of my mom's life. Granted, she was probably asleep. I mean, my mom was probably asleep, but those last moments, so forth. Something that can't be changed. But I mean, I didn't do anything wrong. I was taking care of my mom. It's just that those moments, the last moments of life in my mom, I spent going upstairs and texting a bit with um, my friend. So I continued texting with her, and I think we just basically drifted apart in terms of communication. We just sort of stopped sending messages back and forth. No big incident to remember, just drifted apart. Um, so let me see. I know it's bad form to hold something right. Uh, Toastmasters. I was a member of Toastmasters, which may not show in these videos, but yes, I was a member of Toastmasters. Oh, it's not. I'm sure it's not good form to hold something right in front of you while you're talking. It's a sign probably of shyness if you hold something up in front of your face. Okay. So cut to um, very recently, in the past few months, um, I went on Facebook and I probably caught the name of this person. You know how you go through Facebook and you just happen to catch, oh yeah, I was a friend with that person. Oh, you're just reminded of this person. Well, excuse me. There's an independent producer that I reached out to years back because he produced a documentary called Women on Men. Um, and then he produced another one called More Women on Men. It's a unique documentary premise. He quickly way back there's an era of video cassettes, and he would see all these dating videos, how to date, how to get more women. You can tell, this is aimed at men, how to get dates with women, and they were always by men. They were hosted by men. There's men telling you how you can get a date with a woman. Well, he went out and he got several, women of who had theatrical experience and kind of industry experience. They looked good on camera, and they were photogenic, and they knew how to comport themselves on camera. Um, so I got that video, and then I subsequently bought the DVD, which also happened to have the sequel, More Women on Men, and it's also a pretty good video. It's introduced by a woman. There are women talking and being pretty open. I mean, not extraordinarily open, but I mean, pretty open with, and I hope genuine about what they find attractive in men and how they'd want men to approach them. Basically, it's how they would want men to approach them and how they don't want men to approach them. I don't see why if this documentary isn't more popular, I don't see why not. Anyway, I reached out to this person sometime in the past few months, and said, "Hi, how are you?" Indirectly, in my mind, I'm thinking networking is good. Um, he said, "Oh, essentially good. What have you been up to?" And so I mentioned my Madonna project, and he said, "Oh, that sounds interesting. Can you email me something more about the premise? Tell me more about the story." So I emailed him, and he replied back pretty quickly, and he said, "Oh, I enjoy. Can we have a can I chat with you essentially, can I chat with you over the phone about it?" Um, oh wow, yeah. Um, so I emailed him. Oh yeah, right. I had already emailed him. So I prepared for the phone chat and did my homework. I looked up more about his background. I watched videos that he had presented, so that I can impress him with being knowledgeable about what he's all about. So we talked on the phone, and he gave me some good advice. First of all, he said he liked the premise, and he grew up enjoying Madonna's work and being a fan, and he could totally relate. In essence, he could see potential in the story. It's potentially something that would speak to a wide audience. A lot of people could relate to it. if not necessarily Madonna, just the idea um, of falling in love with a celebrity and wanting to meet the celebrity in person. um, excuse me. Um, so he gave me advice on contacting somebody about legality of it, not only in obtaining rights to the likeness of somebody, namely Madonna, her name and appearance and so forth, but also to using music for the soundtrack. Um, I wanted actual, authentic 80s music, not just 80s music. And I had a list of specific songs going all the way back practically to the inception of this whole project. I had in mind specific songs I wanted 80s music um, in the movie because they fit thematically with the movie. And I mentioned this before. I'll mention a little bit again. I wanted Material Girl in there, not just because Madonna is known and nicknamed as the Material Girl, but specifically in the video, the music video, she shows two sides. She shows a glamorous send-up of Marilyn Monroe in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and then she is seen behind the scenes in her dressing room, um, being given expensive gifts, and she's not really all that particularly attached to the gifts. She's not really. She may be flattered, but she doesn't really feel emotionally attached to the gifts. And at the end of the music video, after having seen, after we see the send up of her glamorous side, she steps into a beat up truck or car, some kind of, I think it's a truck with somebody and they're wearing basically nice clothing, but casual street clothes, and they drive away, and she's smiling. That duality is one of the primary themes in my Madonna movie project. There's another one, Union of the Snake, which I'd like to know from Duran Duran what they meant by that song. They may say, well, it's whatever you think it meant, which is a non-answer. They may say that, I don't know. But I see it as something instinctive, some kind of communication or some kind of sense within you that's drawing you somewhere, and you're fearful, you're hesitant about where it's leading you. It's like your conscious linking up with your subconscious. And that's a theme in the movie. And of course, I also had that song by Vanessa Williams, Sometimes the Sun Goes Round the Moon, or sometimes the song, sometimes it snows in June, sometimes the earth goes round the moon, sometimes and that song came out technically, I think, 1989. So it wouldn't really fit into the movie, but that's one of those songs that I kept in mind still, just because it communicated what would be going through Jake's mind, and kind of the overall theme of luck in the story, weird luck in the story. Sometimes weird things happen and good things come about because of it. Sometimes good things happen. And there's another song about running in. Oh, anyway, I'll do a separate video about the different songs, but you get my idea that there were specific songs picked for thematic purposes, and not just because they were popular or superficially they fit into a visual in the movie. So that's it. This is part 2, the long-awaited, promised part 2 of my journey through storytelling up to the present. The independent producer said that he couldn't get involved at a level like this. He did recommend doing a 10 to 15 minute. Well, he recommended doing a short film, and I looked up approximately what it was. He may have said 10 to 15 minutes, but that is about the length of a short film. And I remembered George Lucas having done THX 1138 as a short film first in college, and then doing it as a feature length film. And I also have a regret and dismay and frustration. Those are the primary emotions. My primary kind of negative emotion, kind of down emotions I feel typically, because I didn't have the resources. I didn't go to NYU. I didn't have the connections that somebody like Steven Spielberg had. I mean, he did something remarkable in what he did at such a young age too, but I feel like it's partly on me that I didn't push further to get those resources. And I also feel down because um, I didn't have access to resources like that. So that's it in a nutshell. I don't know if I'll ever be famous. I don't know if this will ever be produced. And if you saw my prior video I filmed just before this one about confronting fear, my one fear that I could easily name is not completing something that people would know me for and acknowledge my talent for. So I'm almost out of breath, and I need a glass of some kind of beverage to soothe my throat. So that'll be it for right now, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.